So good evening, everyone. I'm Tim Stokes, president of South Puget Sound Community College, and just delighted to have you all here this evening. Thanks for joining us. Sorry about the delay. Governor Locke was tied up in a little traffic challenge between Bellevue and Olympia, which I'm sure you can understand. So we're really excited to welcome Merritt Long and Gary Locke to the stage and the Artist and Lecture Series here tonight at South Puget Sound. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our presenting sponsors, Ole Fed Credit Union, our Ole Federal Savings, Comcast, Safeway, Washington Realtors, Virgil Adams Real Estate, and of course our good friends at SPSCC, Merritt Long and Marcia Tondano Long, Beth Morrison, and Jeff Crooks. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight Merritt Long. Merritt is a graduate of Morehouse College and Seattle University. He's lived in the Pacific Northwest since 1968. Throughout his professional career, he's had numerous leadership roles in state agencies, including the Commission for Vocational Rehabilitation and Vocational Education, the Human Rights Commission, the Washington State Lottery, and Liquor Control Board. Merritt also recently published his first book, My View from the Back of the Bus, which we'll look forward to hearing more about tonight. Before we get to that, I was looking through it again tonight after I've read it once and was looking through it, but I wanted to read this from Merritt's book because I think this is where we're all feeling we are right now at South Puget Sound Community College. Great insights in the book, but this was my favorite passage today. It was my senior year at Morehouse College, May 1968. I was, believe it or not, 3 weeks away from college graduation. I had triple checked my credits for graduation and everything was A-okay. For the remainder of my time at Morehouse College, I had a grand total of 12 more class hours to complete. I stood in that sweet spot and savored every moment. And that's exactly where we are right now at South Puget Sound Community College. And I know our graduates are really excited about their upcoming commencement. And joining Merritt tonight is Governor Gary Locke, a longtime friend and colleague of Merritt and Marcia. Gary is a graduate of Yale University and Boston University School of Law. Gary served in our state House of Representatives and was King County executive before being elected governor in 1996. After completing 2 terms as governor, Gary was selected by then President Barack Obama to be Secretary of Commerce and later as U.S. Ambassador to China. Gary now lives back in the Northwest, and I'm happy to say is one of my colleagues and serves as president of Bellevue College. Merritt and Gary, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn this over to you.
Well, great. Thank you very much, President Tim Stokes, and thank you for the great hospitality and the sponsorship of this lecture series. It's really my pleasure to be here with a longtime friend, Merritt Douglas Long.
Thank you.
And, we actually go back quite a ways, even before I was governor, when I was in the state legislature. And so you've really come a long way. So from your days as a safety patrol captain in grade school?
Right. Well, and for a former Eagle Scout, you haven't done too badly yourself.
Well, I've read your book actually several times now, and every time it's like poetry. And I really love some of the personal viewpoints of family and just the struggles that you've endured and overcome, but also just how you grew up and your very first home in, where was that? Was that
Gladstone Alley.
Gladstone Alley in Alabama.
Shotgun House.
I was going to talk about that. But,
okay, go ahead.
On the top of your book, at the beginning of your book, there's a quote. Merritt Long's tale belongs to all of us. This is not just personal memoir. This is a history of a country. It gripped me from the first word to the last, engrossing, poignant, and ultimately triumphant. And this is from Dolan Perkins Valdez, author of Balm and the New York Times bestseller Wench. Why did you write this book? I mean, obviously, it took a while.
Right.
I don't know how you could have recalled all these details going back to your childhood when you were 4 or 5 years old. And obviously it's very timely because we've just been racked in the last year with witnessing the brutal death and killing of George Floyd. But this It's timely because of the riots in Charlottesville, but obviously you started this book well before then.
Right.
Why write this book?
Well, it was very serendipitous in the beginning, in that as the lottery director, when I was part of your administration, as a cabinet member, the staff or the directors of the Washington State Liquor Control Board invited me to participate in Black History Month. Okay. And I thought about what iconic figure I might write about, which I've done in the past. And I thought about, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King as a possibility. I thought about a person who helped found Tumwater, George Bush, here not too far from where we are. And then I thought about Charles Drew and the found plasma. And then I thought, for some reason, my first bus ride, I couldn't get that out of my mind, and the impact that that had on me. And I don't know about a number of folks, but I tend to remember more from stories and vignettes than I do from facts and figures. So I decided that since I was the historical reference, I should and I would write about my first bus ride, which I did. And after doing that, the reception that I received from individuals who were there and listening and participating, I thought that I had the beginnings of something, that it's something that, one, as an homage to my parents for the sacrifices that they had made for my brother and I to go to college, would be well to document that. And then secondly, I thought about our daughter and our son and nieces and cousins and nephews and folks who really aren't familiar other than, say, by the media of that era. And I thought it would be good for them to know about it. And then the more I thought about it, I realized that it was a bigger story than that. It was like what Dolan had said. It was an American story. And that's how it started.
So when was this? When did you actually start then, and trying to recollect and bring in all the details? Because this book is just filled with details. I don't know how you can remember so much.
Well, now, I'm very good at remembering things from the past. Now, ask me about this morning, and I might have a different response. It was over 15 years ago.
Wow.
And Denny Heck was very catalytic in my beginning this journey. I sat with Denny one day after he finished his first book.
Denny Heck, for our viewers, is a former member of the state legislature, chief of staff for Governor Booth Gardner, and then became very successful in private investment, then went on to run for Congress, and he is now our lieutenant governor.
Right. So I sat with Denny and asked him about writing a book. And Denny, being Denny, said, Merritt, you wouldn't believe the number of people that sit with me and ask me what you're asking me about writing a book. But he said, very few do it or finish it, okay? And after working on it for a while, I knew why he said that, okay? That was 15 years ago.
Okay,
That's when it happened.
Wow, it's amazing. So let's get into some of it.
Okay.
You talk a lot about your family, and especially your mom. Your mom was a major influence in your life. But before I talk about your mom, I want to talk a little bit about your dad.
Okay.
Because I found him very, very fascinating. You talk a little bit about a sweet moment with your dad when you were very, very young.
Right.
And I'm going to read part of it.
Okay.
And it says, as a child, teen, and young adult, the primary emotions I saw my father show involved anger, displeasure, remoteness, and physical and verbal abuse toward my mother, my brother, and me. He saw his role as the primary financial provider and disciplinarian. Fortunately, on one count, and unfortunately on the other, he excelled well beyond expectations on both. And I think you were referring to how he really excelled as a primary financial provider,
Right.
but he also excelled as a disciplinarian.
Right.
But there was a very touching moment where you talk about seeing him lying on the floor on a very hot, muggy day.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's on page 5 if you want to refer to it. Or if
I'm
you just,
okay.
All right,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
to it. Tell us.
Yeah,
Tell
sure.
me, what was that all about?
Well, it was one of those moments where he was lying there and really didn't have that much verbal interaction with my father at that particular time, and he was rather aloof. And I remember he would give my brother and I our baths in the tin tub, and because of his working in the coal mines and the ore mines, and his hands were just like sandpaper. So it's like, oh my God, Dad, you're gonna scrape the skin off of me? Okay, I'll be clean.
You don't need a washcloth with his hands, right?
Right. And I just felt like, he seems to be in a really good mood, at peace, and I just climbed on his back as he was lying there, and I started. There was a comb close by, and I just started combing his hair. And my father had just a real mane of hair. It was black. At that time, it was curly and straight combined, and I would comb it, and I started playing a game with it. It's like I'm going to redirect it and change how he looked with a certain hairdo. But every time I would comb it, it popped back to where we started from. And then the other something is, which is really the nub here, Governor, is that as I reflect back on my childhood with my father, there weren't very many of those moments. So that's why it stood out.
Yeah.
So,
but he also had a very strong work ethic. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, he really valued work and had pretty strong views about getting a job.
Oh yeah. Well, my father's basic belief, severalfold. One was that if you want a job, you can find a job. It may not be the job you want, but you can find a way of earning a living for your family. Now, listen to me very carefully on this one, because I don't want to offend Uber drivers or taxi drivers. But one of the things my father used to say, that taxi drivers were the laziest people in the world. And the reason he said that is because they sat down all day. Because in his mind, unless you were doing some physical work, unless you were digging a ditch, unless you were working on a construction of a building or working in the ore mines or the coal mines, physical labor was his definition of work. And here, for the last several days, for some reason, I have imagined my father walking from downtown Bessemer with 2 bags of federal assistance in the sense of pork and gravy during the Eisenhower administration. Yeah, you're too young for this probably, but cheese in that package. And what he would do, he would go and pick that up when he was unemployed and things were very difficult. And he would have one bag on his right shoulder, another one on his left for our grandmother who lived next door, and one for our family. But the thing that I also admired about him, he carried it as though he's carrying gold, head up, erect, moving forward. So he really believed that there's no excuse for not having a job.
And because work was so important to him, and he viewed himself as the financial provider of the family, you talk about one incident in which he quit.
Yes.
Which was totally against his ethic, to quit a job.
Right.
What was that all about?
Right. Well, what happened was that there was a construction site. There was a major project, and I mean literally project homes being built maybe a mile or so from where we lived at the time on Exeter Avenue. And it was around 2:33. I was home, and my father came in, and which was early than usual for him coming home for work. And he came into the house and he said, "Kate," that's what he called my mom, his wife, "I just couldn't take it anymore. I just couldn't take it anymore." And my mom said, Mac, what's wrong?" And he said, "I was at work, and it seems as though whatever I did today my white supervisor wasn't satisfied, that he was cursing me and calling me all kinds of names. And he said I had either one or two choices. One was to quit or to knock the shit out of him. Okay. And he decided that he had to quit because he didn't want to go to jail and et cetera, et cetera. And then I remember him starting to cry because he felt that he had let his family down, that he had quit. I mean, for him, that was just totally out of character. But the other part that was sweet in that to see my father and my mother embracing each other, and my mother saying, Mac, it's going to be okay. Mac, it's going to be okay. Because I hadn't seen very many instances of affection between the two of them. Right. So how ironic.
Yeah, yeah. I think you said, even though my father was digging a trench for a construction job, he still retained his pride and sense of self. It was tragic because in addition to quitting, a word not in my father's vocabulary, he experienced the pain of letting down his family, especially his wife. Fortunately, my father's self-worth and sense of dignity won over verbal abuse at any price. If he stayed, I think he would have left part of himself in that 3-foot ditch.
Would you do me a favor, Governor, and continue to read this one other little nugget there that I want to expound upon just a little bit, please? Right. Just that same area.
I remember seeing black men similar to my father in age, education, and work experience, and some appeared to have left their pride and self-respect in a ditch, trench, or the back of a garbage truck, never to be seen or heard from again. Sometimes the price of doing the right economic thing pales in comparison to the long-term psychological harm that scars one forever.
Yeah, thank you. And that's powerful to realize that and to see that, you see one thing in one sort of lens as you experience life and another in another lens. And then at some point, sometimes you can see how they connect. Yeah. So I'm glad my father did what he did.
So obviously he was a great example and provided direction for you as you and your brother were growing up. But it seems like it was your mom who was the center of the household and giving you these pearls of wisdom and preparing those Sunday night dinners.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about life with mom.
Oh, okay. Well, Mom, look at me. I'm starting to just smile and light up just to hear her name. But my mom was a very, very, very special lady. I mean, she was a visionary. She was very involved politically. She studied like she was studying for a PhD or law school to take the test to be a voter. She was one of the first persons of color on our side of town to be a registered voter. So she really exercised that spirit and sense of community.
And those tests were really designed to keep Black people from being able to vote. I've seen some of those exams, and first blush, I could never have passed any of those exams.
I know. And there were certain questions at some states of here's a jar of beans or of candy. How many candies are in the jar? And, poll taxes and some of the things, not so much like that, but we'll come to that maybe later about how that mirrors some things that are happening today in terms of redistricting and what have you. And then my mother, because my father's employment was intermittent at times, knew that if we were going to be successful as a family, she needed to work. So she traveled to Chicago for about 4 months to be trained as a licensed practical nurse. And here's the irony and the horrificness of racism and segregation. She could work as a nurse in Alabama, but she couldn't receive the training in Alabama. So she had to go to Chicago to be trained. On the upside, my father had been married previously and had a son. We have another brother, Mac. So she had a chance to stay with him, came back to Alabama. And from there, she worked as a licensed practical nurse for over 25 years.
Actually, we should back up a little bit. The house that you grew up in or was born in was in a place called Gladstone Alley. Right. A very segregated community. Right. And describe a little bit about what that house was all about and the conditions of growing up in that house.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because when the first thing I think about when I think about Gladstone and Gladstone Alley is the fact that the alleys in Bessemer, most of the ones where white people lived, their alleys were paved. And the alleys where homes were constructed and where my parents lived for a period of time, my brother and I, were dirt road. I mean, so just from the inequality of alleys, it's just totally different, okay? There was no plumbing in the sense of being able to go to the restroom. There was a toilet on the outside, outhouse. There was a wood stove, no refrigerator. My father would go to the ice house.
But not many people know where the old term ice box comes from.
Right.
This was literally an ice box.
Right.
Describe what an ice box is.
Okay. Ice box is it's well, let's say it's a box. It's a piece of not a furniture, but
almost in many places it's almost like a nice piece of oak cabinetry.
Right. And with that, it had aluminum or some sort of device on the inside that would keep the ice from melting so fast, but it eventually would melt. So in order to keep meat and other things that were perishable, we'd have a delivery from the ice truck to put in the ice box, or my father would go to the ice house, put the ice in the bag, put it on his back, and bring it home to put in the ice box.
Right. These are big blocks of ice.
Huge.
Sometimes a foot by a foot by a foot, and it would melt very, very slowly. But yeah, there was no refrigeration, no refrigerators at the time, and so people had these ice boxes, and that's where the term came from.
Yeah,
I remember growing up calling it the ice box, even though ours was an electric refrigerator, but we call it the ice box.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But right across the street, I mean, you lived in the black part of town,
right?
But right across the street in Gladstone Alley were the white people.
Right. Yeah.
And so, what were some of the words of wisdom and pearls of wisdom from your mother?
Well, several things come to mind. One is because whites in the area may say negative things about you, not me personally, but you as a black person. And because there were certain facilities, whether that be recreational, whether that be certain industries that you might be interested in pursuing, and there would be a negative response to that, don't let that stop you from pursuing your dream. And you are as good as anyone, and don't let anyone try to convince you otherwise.
She told you how to talk to white people. What was that?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe read a little something on that.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. My mother's first class seminar of things to do and not to do in the white world seemed to come out of nowhere. Had something happened to her that day? Some slight verbal affront or disrespectful tone? Maybe she was totally ignored at the retail counter. Once, while my mother waited, the clerk continued to talk with a white acquaintance who stood there, or perhaps some white patron in a hurry to purchase some item for her child, bumped her to the side and acted as though it never happened. I knew the state of Alabama had rules, regulations, and laws, but I also knew there were unwritten rules that protected how white people treated black people. This allowed some to physically and verbally abuse black people and get away with it. When my mother spoke to me that day, the rhythm of her voice was unlike anything I've experienced before. There was a tremendous sense of urgency as she began to speak. It was as if she felt that she should have had this conversation with me sooner and was making up for lost time. As she bent down, she cupped my face in both her hands and pulled me closer with our faces almost touching. This was the first and last time she would do this. Suddenly, she released my face and tapped me on both shoulders and commanded me not to slouch or stoop, especially so when talking to white people. My mother told me that whenever I went to downtown Bessemer, there were certain things I must remember and do when dealing with white people. I was about 5 years old at the time, and I had recently begun first grade at Hart Elementary School. Her first edict involved talking with whites and to always look them directly in their eyes. By doing so, she felt I would display my lack of fear. Always believe that you are as good as anyone else, no matter what people say, she said, adding, the world may seem unfair at times, but that is the way things are. She told me the only things I had control over was how I handled myself during these situations. She said to always obey the laws because the police would kill me in a blink of an eye and get away with it. Avoid them whenever possible, she counseled. The seriousness of her voice has become fainter over the years in my memory, but the message remains with me and always will.
In essence, that was kind of her version of the talk.
That was the talk.
That was the talk.
That was the talk.
And certainly it's just as true today as we've seen with all the killings and, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the list goes on and on.
Right. And back to some of your earlier comments, Governor, about the timeliness of the book, given this historical perspective and where we are now, you would have think some of the things I'm writing about were things that I wrote about a couple days ago or 2 weeks ago, but I started on this 15 years ago, and this was probably written, this particular section, 10 years ago. So it's things change, but they remain the same.
That's right. That's right. And so your household was always filled with dinners, food.
Oh, yeah.
Food was a central part of the life of the Long family.
Oh, you better believe it.
Tell us about some of the meals that your mom would cook for your dad and your brother, older brother, and yourself.
Okay, thank you. This particular vignette that I'm going to read is one of my wife's favorites, Marcia's favorites. So I know she'll enjoy this. We are both pretty good foodies. And this is Guess Who Came After Dinner? Mom, Dad, Brother Ken, and I were relaxing in our living room one fall evening at 2317 Exeter Avenue watching the Ed Sullivan Show. This Sunday night ritual was one of the few occasions other than dinner when we were all together. It was 1961, and I was a sophomore at Jackson S. Abrams High School. Earlier that day, immediately following church, we had feasted on one of my mom's special Sunday suppers. She routinely prepared Sunday dinners the day before. That way, she relaxed on Sunday because all she needed to do was warm the various dishes. Once in a while, my father would cook during the week, but Sunday dinner was hers alone. It was a big deal, and we all looked forward to this treat. My mom actually prepared 2 meals on Saturdays, one for my father, who was extremely picky about his food, which meant my mom tailored one meal specifically to him. My father had his own small table in the kitchen where he ate all his meals. My mother, brother, Ken, and I would eat together around the dining room table, enjoying the second meal she prepared to satisfy the limited palates of her 2 sons. I know exactly what some of you are thinking, how spoiled and pampered the men of the Long household were. And you are absolutely correct. And we enjoyed every morsel and minute of it. This particular Sunday, Mom had prepared one of my favorite pots. It consisted of green beans with chopped white onions, green onions, and chunks of white potatoes that had simmered around ham hocks for a couple of hours. I have relived eating this amazing dish many times. And when doing so, the saliva in my mouth starts to get in the ready position. I have imagined a little grease from the ham hocks gently burning my lips. Not too much, but just enough to get my attention. During previous meals, the grease from the fixing would speak to me, saying, calm down, slow down. The food is not going anywhere. Act as though you've had this dish. I have to remind you of this to slow your roll every time. Of course, there were extra onions available if you wanted to add them, and small green peppers on a little plate looking up at you saying, I bet you want to try me, but beware, I am too hot to handle. Mom also prepared T-bone steaks in such a way that I had never experienced anything close to them since. Actually, I'm not quite sure exactly what went into her preparation and execution of this dish. Execution is indeed the right word because she literally killed it. With the exception of baking certain pies and cakes, I never saw her use a recipe. Her recipe, I am sure, came from her mother and the lessons from trial and error. Here we go. On that Saturday, Mom began by seasoning to her taste at least 3 T-bone steaks. This seasoning consisted of black pepper, salt, celery, and garlic salt, and a splash or two of Worcestershire sauce. Then she let the meat marinate for 4 to 5 hours. I knew the magic was about to happen when I heard her tearing the aluminum foil to cover the pan of steaks before placing them in the oven at 275 degrees. I don't know how long the steaks would originally cook on Saturday, but on Sunday, she would put those bad boys back in the oven until she felt they were ready to serve. The meat was like butter, cooked past well done, but still juicy, flavorful, and cocoa brown in its sauce. Once the dishes were served up, the real dance began. The juices from the ham hocks, beans, and potatoes would slowly wind their way to intersect with the steak. What a wonderful and glorious collision. I'd momentarily stop eating as suggested to me earlier, and wisely by the pot grease. Just savor the moment. Nirvana is rapidly approaching. Remember, act like you've had this before. My mom was not big on saying I love you. She showed and gave her love to you by doing things with you and for you. That could be cooking, baking, making sure you knew how to properly use a knife and fork, instilling a sense of pride and confidence that you were special when everything around you said differently, and pushing you to be stronger when you became discouraged. As we were relaxing after Mom's wonderful dinner and thinking about dessert, we didn't know what we were about to have, that we were about to have unexpected guests. My family's evening of TV watching changed dramatically when out of nowhere came the sounds of horns honking. Not a honk to let someone know you're there, or a honk to say hello to a friend you haven't seen for a while. This honking was different. It was the sound of many cars honking, saying, come look at me, I'm coming down your street. And the reason I'm honking is for you to see and fear me. I got up from the sofa, walked over to the front door, and looked through one of the 3 small windows in the door to see what was going on. To my shock and amazement, I saw at least 10 cars, one behind the other. Horns blared, and the inside lights of all the cars were on, illuminating 2 people in the front seats and 2 people in the back seats. They were what appeared to be wearing white sheets with hoods. As I watched from a distance of about 20 feet, the hoods looked like an upside down V shape or cone head, similar to the Conehead family on Saturday Night Live with Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin. However, this was no joke, and no one in our household laughed. Even though this Klan caravan occurred over 50 years ago, the image of that experience is as sharp and clear as when it happened. However, I am quick to remind myself that Klansmen driving through the neighborhood, while not your usual Sunday experience, paled in comparison to some of the horrific acts of brutality, lynching, and murdering of primarily Black men in the South as well as the North. For a moment that seemed like an eternity, I was stuck at the small window watching and not knowing what to do. Should I call the police? I don't think so. Policemen were probably a part of the Ku Klux Klan caravan. Should I run outside and let them know I wasn't afraid of their antics? No, not if I wanted to live, given the history of the Klan. I thought I'd let the Klan know I was watching them and turn the porch light on. As soon as I hit the switch, Ken called out, "Turn that porch light off. Let's not bring attention to ourselves. Come back over here and sit down." Ken was right. I sat down, dazed that the Klan was making such a public display of their existence. After the Klan drove away, I wondered why our neighborhood and why that night. As a family, we never discussed the incident that night or in the future. At the same time, we didn't need to discuss it. Everyone knew what time it was. It was time to remind the colored folks what their place and where their place was in the white world of Bessemer, Alabama. The colored and white water fountains with its specialized plumbing to provide colored water for coloreds and specially distilled white water for the whites wasn't that long ago. The Klan and other mass white men wanted to preserve the past and shape the future based on a racist past.
You say it's more than 50 years ago, but we've seen episodes of that just within the last year, 2 years.
Right.
How does that, what images of the Capitol riot, the January 6th, or the violence in Charlottesville, how did that impact you, and what went through your mind?
Today, for the first time, when I was rereading some of these vignettes, and that last sentence that I read, the Klan and other mass whites wanted to preserve the past and shape the future based on a racist past, I thought about January 6th, white supremacy. If you're white, you're right. And if things aren't going the way you want them to go, whatever you need to do to get there is okay. So it really just was back to an earlier comment I made, and you as well, and that is the fact that things have changed in so many ways, but at the same time, they haven't. And when you have the president, fortunately, this president, President Biden, asking and saying, if those were Black Lives Matter protesters and not insurrectionists, what would have happened to them? How would they have been treated? So we are in a real crossroads at this country. Fortunately, we have the current president we have.
You know, you talked about, in the passage about the Klan, in a later chapter, you talk about working as a high school student at Merritt flower shop in Mr. Wright.
Right.
And tell us, I mean, you couldn't use the bathroom. You were not allowed to use the bathroom in Merrill's flower shop.
Right.
You had forced to go across the street. And at one time, he was reading from a newspaper and said, pointing out something, and used the N-word.
Right.
And yet he oftentimes showed you incredible acts of kindness and generosity.
Right.
Picked you up, drove you home, took you out for hamburgers, treated you to, your new favorite
strawberry milkshake.
Strawberry milkshake instead of the old chocolate malt that you used to like.
Cut it loose.
Right. So he was incredibly kind to you, and yet he still perpetuated this division, letting you know that you were still black and you were not still welcome in many parts of his establishment and in his life. How do we reconcile that? Those acts of kindness and yet the perpetuation of almost, as you say it through many parts of your book, the white line, the black line.
Right. Well, let me go back for just a second, because one summer, my brother, I took a vacation. And I was making during the summer, $11.50 a week, 6 days a week, 8 to 5:30 or 6. And my brother worked in my stead at the flower shop. And after he worked there for the week, at the end of his tenure, he said to me that Mr. Wright had said to him that I needed to be more deferential. I needed to be more yes, sir, no, sir, to white people, and not be so independent in my ways. And now, when I went back to work, nothing changed on my part. Mr. Wright never brought that up to me. However, my brother believes, teasingly, he said the night of the Klans when they came by, he said that was your boss with his colleagues coming by to send you a message. Right. And at the time, I thought it was funny, him saying that. But, he was right. Yeah. He was right. But back to your question. And in the morning when I'll never forget it, because and this is the beautiful part of writing, Governor. I remember writing about that morning when I walked into the flower shop, and he was reading the newspaper usually when I came in. And I had been working on this for years. And one day when I was writing, I heard the bells of the door when you open and close it. It had just come back to me and I'd come in and I heard the bells ring, and Mr. Wright was reading, and he said, Merritt, I see where a N-word person was shot last night. I'm like, where does this come from? What is this about? So I walk over to where he's reading, and I read what he'd read. And I said, Mr. Wright, that doesn't say, I think he was saying, he then tried to change it to like Nigra. I said, that's not what that says. It says Negro. And I just walked away, and that was the end of the conversation. So I think he was a victim of his times. I think in the fact, I remember working there, and most of the customers were white and getting flowers. Black customers tended to come in to get seeds to plant for the gardens, for food, not just as a hobby. And it seems, and he was always so friendly. He was Mr. Customer Service. Right. He was the Nordstrom's of the flower business. He was good. I mean, I learned a lot from him in terms of his people skills. So he would be interacting with some of the black customers, and he'd almost forget that he was working with a black person and have to sort of tone down his niceness because, wait a minute, I shouldn't be this way with them. It was like he was forced to be a certain way. And I'll just conclude this by saying, after finishing college and coming to the Northwest and working for X number of years, maybe 3-4 years, had returned to Alabama, and I was at the bank with my father, and I saw him.
That's right, you saw him.
And
you went up to him, and what did you say to him?
I said, Guy, do you know who I am? I said, hello. And I don't know whether he said hello or not. And I asked him, do you know who I am? Because I had the big fro. And I don't know. Maybe he didn't recognize.
Very different from your high school days.
Exactly. And he said, "Yeah, I know who you are." I said, "Good." And I walked away. And here's the other part that just really made my day. As my father and I are driving away, who I didn't think had any idea that that interaction was going on, he said, "What did you say to your former boss?" I said, "I called him by his first name." And my father said, "That must have felt good, huh?" I said, "Sure did."
Instead of Mr. Wright, it was Bob Wright. But we're running short of time, and we have so much more to cover. So let me get to, you went to Morehouse, but your older brother, Ken, went to, was it Clark?
Clark, yes, right across the street.
Both of these are almost across the street from each other.
Literally.
In Atlanta, Georgia.
That's correct.
You went from Alabama to Atlanta to go to college. Why Morehouse?
My brother suggested it. He was at Clark. He'd been in Atlanta.
And this is both Morehouse and Clark are among the historically black colleges and universities. Right. So he's a proud Clark guy, but he tells you to go to Morehouse?
Yeah, he did. He did. Well, and I think he would agree with this in the sense of stature or prestige or schools. Clark, Morehouse was probably staying a little taller in that regard. And Spelman College, our sister school, was right down the street. Morris Brown is not too far away. So it was just a mecca of black colleges in close proximity to one another. But the reason I went to Morehouse was my brother's recommendation. All right. Yeah.
And you met some incredible icons while attending the historically black college and universities.
Right.
Tell us about some of the incredible civil rights leaders that you had a chance to meet, and who stands out the most?
The champ, Muhammad Ali. And in fact, the first time I saw Muhammad was, I believe I was a senior in high school, and my mom and I were visiting my brother at Clark, and we went to a football game, and Muhammad was in the stadium, and someone started saying, the champ is here, and we looked back, and here's Muhammad, and he had on a black raincoat, sunglasses. He looked like a black Greek god. I mean, he was so impressive, and it was one of those things where when he came into the stadium, it was rainy and overcast, but after him being there for 10 minutes, the sun came out. I mean, just like a TV moment. But actually being on campus and meeting him, I was at Clark College for a religion and philosophy class. And this is when Muhammad had been stripped of his championship, and he was lecturing on college campuses around the country. And he was in Atlanta for that particular purpose. And he came into the classroom. And as he came into the classroom, the instructor, Dr. Rogers, literally Muhammad walked in and the instructor just walked away. I mean, he just gave it up. It's no longer his. So let me just real quickly go to Muhammad Ali and share just a couple things there that he said that day that I hadn't really heard before expressed the way that he expressed it. And Governor, I'm on page 162 for your reference. Muhammad Ali proceeded to give the class a lecture about the negative connotations associated with the word black and the positive attributes associated with the word white. His observations included the following: white hat, good guy; white lie, good; black hat, bad guy; black magic, evil; angel food cake, white; black cat, bad luck; devil food cake, black; white angels, good; black male, bad; good hair, straight hair; bad hair, nappy, curly hair. This impromptu lecture provided by the former heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali, focused on how he felt some white people tried to consciously and subconsciously influence the thinking and self-concept of black people and the perception of black people by associating negativity and in some cases evil with the word black. I don't recall very many questions being asked of the champ. Like me, most of the students had never heard the perspective that Ali shared that spring day. It was as if he was going behind the meaning of the word black and how one's psyche is influenced by something that on its surface may appear harmless.
Who were some of the other luminary civil rights icons that you met while attending Morehouse?
The first icon that I met was my freshman year. I was coming out of the oldest dorm on campus, Graves Hall, and I heard this person speaking, and the voice and just the sound of his voice was one that made me want to, who is that? Where is this person? Who is he? And as I walked and found the crowd gathered around this person, it was Julian Bond, who is a Morehouse grad. In fact, he and John Lewis were the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they ran against each other, and John Lewis won to be the congressional representative from Georgia. But I never seen or heard a black person speak who was running for elective office. That was the first time.
He was running for the state legislature in Georgia.
In Georgia, right. And he was elected, but he wasn't seated for, it took a court to allow him to be seated because of his objections to the Vietnam War.
Right. The Georgia legislature refused to seat him.
Right.
He took it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
And the Supreme Court said that the legislature was depriving him of his freedom of free speech.
Right. And then the other something is, I think about President Obama in the sense of the look and his hairstyle, which in those days, which I had one at the time as well, was called a cavadas, in terms of wearing the hair real short, with it lined up real neat and close. And Julian Bond that day, that's the way he wore his hair. He had on his blue button-down shirt, penny loafers, no penny in the loafers, no socks. So he was very impressive.
But you also met Rosa Parks.
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that while you were at Morehouse or later on in life?
That was later in life. In fact, that was when I was the head of the Commission for Voc Ed. And
here in the state of Washington?
Here in the state of Washington. And former governor, past late, great Booth Gardner, Denny Heck, chief of staff, asked me to go to Yakima and represent the governor at the Yakima Opportunities Industrialization Center banquet. And Sister Rosa Parks was the keynote speaker.
Whoa.
Okay.
Wow.
Now, I got there, someone saw me, knew, who I was, and said, let's get you seated. And it was one of those head tables governors where there must have been 100 people, I said, well, I know I won't be in the back, representing the governor, but, I'm not expecting to be primetime seating. So we get there and the person says, here's your seat, Mr. Long. And I'm seated next to Rosa Parks.
Wow.
Okay. I'm just blown away. So I sit down and gather myself for a couple of minutes. And then I lean over to Mrs. Parks and I said, Mrs. Parks, I'm Merritt Long. I'm from Bessemer, Alabama. And she went, Merritt, what are you doing way out here? It was so sweet. It was like I was at a family reunion and she was someone that hadn't seen me in a very long time. And the aura around her was very heavenly and very spiritual. I felt as though I was like sitting between my mother and my grandmother. And then as I traveled back to Olympia, for some reason, I thought about my first bus ride. And on the bus was Sister Rosa Parks sitting there quietly with a black veil and a black hat, just checking things out. And then it just went away.
Actually, tell us about your experience on a bus ride, thinking about that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. In fact, that bus ride is really the launching pad for this book, that first bus ride.
Right.
So I'd be honored to read that. The back of the bus. I was 5 years old and minutes away from my first bus ride to the city of Birmingham, Alabama. There was something special in the air that crisp morning as my mother, brother, Kenneth, and I walked the few blocks from our house to the bus stop. I remember walking carefully to avoid getting scuff marks on my new Buster Brown shoes. The puddles of rainwater from last night's showers weren't to be sought out as in the past. This special Saturday, my mom had combed and brushed my hair and parted it on the left side. We waited at the bus stop on Clarendon Avenue that special Saturday for about 10 minutes before I spotted the large gray bus with red trim barreling toward us. Its squeaky brakes slammed the vehicle to a screeching halt as if the driver had considered passing us by. The white bus driver opened the door. We climbed the 3 steps to where the bus driver sat, stiff in his seat, not bothering to nod or smile hello. My mother deposited 3 quarters for us for our bus fare. The bus driver simply shut the door behind us and started driving down the avenue. Who cared about the silent bus driver? Not me, because I was taking my first bus ride to that faraway land of Birmingham. I felt 10 feet tall. I started moving toward a vacant row of seats. I immediately felt my mom tense up. She quickly grabbed my brother and me by the hand, leading us to the back of the bus. I glanced around, wondering what was wrong with the row of seats I initially considered. Were they broken? Were they dirty? What was wrong with those seats in the front of the bus? No one was sitting there. They seemed okay to me. As we moved to the back of the bus, I saw a sign separating one section of the seats from the other. The wooden sign we passed as we headed to the back of the bus said colored. It looked like the word colored had been burned into the wood with tinges and specks of black and brown. After sitting down, I noticed all of the white people on the bus sat toward the front and the colored sign was behind them. As the bus traveled away from our neighborhood, more and more white passengers got on. So many white people boarded the bus driver pulled over and stopped. He got up from his seat, removed the wooden colored sign, and placed it several rows further to the back of the bus, allowing white riders to sit, but forcing black riders to stand. Once the sign was moved, if seats became available in the front of the bus, they remained vacant because black folks were required to stay put behind the colored sign. How strange, I thought. Even when there were vacant seats in the front and all the seats behind the colored sign were full, black people still had to stay behind the sign and stand. My 5-year-old eyes noticed an elderly black man who looked frail and not in the best of health. As he stood and held on to the overhead bar for support, he swayed back and forth until it seemed he would fall. Then he would catch himself. My gaze would follow him each time he swayed, only to stop just before he fell, as though I had some magical powers that could protect him from falling. For no apparent reason, the bus driver started driving really fast, like he decided to have some cruel and unusual fun intentionally hitting bumps so the black riders would bounce around like bowling balls. For a split second, the back of the bus became heavy with despair and hopelessness. which was apparent by the number of downcast eyes. Suddenly, the frail, elderly black man yelled out with a voice of authority, "Do not pay us no never mind. Don't worry about going fast. There's no one back here. There's no one back here." The bus went silent. We were all suspended in time. The frail, elderly truth teller had expressed the indignity of the moment. My self-respect returned, and judging by the faces of every black person on the bus, so had theirs. It didn't matter that we sat in the back of the bus. Surprisingly, after the elderly gentleman called out the bus driver, he slowed down. For the remaining trip, the bus, with its black and white passengers, stayed quiet. The silence rang out loud and true. When we arrived in Birmingham, the whites exited the bus through the front door and the blacks exited the door through the back. Two races from the same town lived and moved in and out of the city through different doors with different windows. We lived two different lives, one white, one colored.
After graduating from Morehouse, meeting all these civil rights icons, why did you not stay in the South? How'd you end up here in the Pacific Northwest?
Good question. My brother, Kenneth,
Older brother,
Kenneth, and let's see, that's a photo there of Ken, and in fact, this is right, maybe I came in '68, so you can see the big fro, and that's Jackie, who used to work for you in your office, Jackie Long.
I was wondering about that. I was wondering about that connection.
Right.
I read the book and saw the name. I said, could that be our Jackie?
That's your Jackie. Oh, that's our Jackie. Yeah. But
boy, you populated nepotism in the governor's office. You worked in the governor's. Worked for me in the cabinet. Your wife, Marcia, worked, and now you're Jackie.
Yeah, we wanted to get one more, but we didn't make it. Okay, but Ken and Jackie, Ken came to the Northwest 2 years earlier, 1966. He was in the Volunteers in Service to America, the VISTA program, and worked in the Squally with the Indian tribes, and then eventually moved to Seattle. And one summer, '68, when I graduated, he and Jackie were home, and I had gone out I've been interviewing for jobs after finished college and not having very much success. In fact, I was interviewing with this utility company, and this executive asked me, he said, "What's your major? What's your minor?" I said, "I'm a history minor, major in political science." And he said, "Merritt, you probably want to be the mayor of Birmingham." And he just laughed because in 1968 and prior, it was ludicrous and laughable. However, Governor, since 1969, every mayor in Birmingham has been a black person. So I was a year ahead of my time, or behind the time, I guess.
Well, you should have stayed one more year.
One more year. No. But and I might add another footnote, and I'm not trying to plug Morehouse here, but coincidentally, the current mayor is a Morehouse grad. Right. Okay. But Jackie and Ken said if I wanted to come and live with them, they thought I'd have more opportunities in the Northwest. So that's why I came for work. I had a military obligation I needed to take care of, and they thought they could be helpful to me in that as well. So two things in my life that Ken suggested I do. One was to go to Morehouse, and two was to come to the Northwest. So I'm glad I followed his sage advice.
All right. But you started off as a parole officer.
Right.
And then you moved up into vocational education. You ultimately became the director of the
the Commission for Vocation.
Commission for Vocational Education.
Right.
And that agency distributed money to various other institutions across the state.
Right.
Tell us about your first time in trying to meet some of the beneficiaries
Okay.
of your agency's largesse and generosity.
All right. Largesse and generosity. Very good. I'm going to steal that one. Okay. Well, I'm also going to give you another former alum of ours, and yours in particular is Dick Thompson.
Yep.
Dick was the chair for a period of time of the Commission for Voc Ed, so I reported to Dick. And at that particular time, the two institutions, the Superintendent of Public Instruction's Office and the State Board for Community Colleges, in the distribution of monies, they just essentially wanted us to give them equal amounts and they'll decide what to do with it. And as a agency director with what we believe our function was, we thought they should be more about setting priorities. You have finite resources, you have infinite need. Let's make some decisions. So with Dick's leadership, we were able to earmark $500,000 to be used for teacher training because of the demographic changes that were anticipated for the year 2000. So we went through a very exhaustive, competitive bid process. And the winner of that process was Western Washington University. So I'm going to share with you a little something about the interaction that I had with the president at that time of the university and moving forward with the grant award that they had received.
And this was what year, approximately?
1988.
1988, okay.
1988. Being appointed the executive director didn't always mean being recognized as such. In 1988, Scott Rob Fieldman, a vocational education program specialist at the Commission for Voc Ed, suggested we travel to Tacoma, Washington, about 30 minutes north of Olympia, to meet with the president of Western Washington University. The commission had just awarded the university $500,000 contract to develop and provide statewide teacher training for existing and new teachers. This curriculum model and teaching philosophy would be based on the projected demographic changes that would occur in the year 2000. Rob suggested that he set up a photo opportunity in Tacoma for us to meet the president. Rob and I arrived at the Tacoma Sheraton Hotel at the appointed time. We had agreed to meet the president of the university in the lobby of the hotel. Rob and I stood side by side as we stepped onto the escalator and made our way up the lobby. We immediately spotted him at the top of the stairs, the president, awaiting our arrival. I noticed he had zeroed in on Rob and had started to smile at him. Not once did he look in my direction. It was as if I was not even there. Visible but invisible. Suddenly, I saw Rob's body language shift. Like me, he knew what was about to happen, and there was no way to stop it. As we both stepped off the elevator, the Western Washington University president, with not one but two outstretched arms, reached out to Rob. "Mr. Long, what a pleasure it is to meet you." Rob quickly pivoted to me. "No, I'm not Mr. Long. Here's Mr. Long." Awkward and telling. The president momentarily just stood there, speechless, frozen in time with a stunned look on his face. Judging from his facial expression, he looked like a man struggling to wake up from a bad dream. Surely this wasn't happening to him, the president of one of the state's most progressive higher ed institutions, an institution that had recently won a statewide competition bid request, winning out over some of the state's longest standing universities. My thoughts and emotions ranged from surprise, embarrassment for Rob for being caught in the middle of an awkward situation, ironically, because he was white, and finally, the realization on my part of what's new. This was not the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last time when a white person would make assumptions about my place, where I should fit or not fit, or ignore me altogether because of my skin color.
We have just a few minutes left, but you were appointed when I became governor as the director of the lottery.
Yes.
And as Paul Asaki, who used to work for Governor Gardner, who then later on in my second term was chief of staff, he pointed out something about how unusual it was for you to be the lottery director.
Yes, he did.
What did he say to you?
Well, this was prior to the word officially being announced, and this was at I believe the gala, the big party, the inaugural ball. Yeah, inaugural ball. And Paul came up to me and congratulated me. He was an insider, so he knew I was about to be, or I had been blessed by you to be the lottery director. And Paul said, Merritt, he said, it's so good to see that a brother got one of the money agencies. And, I hadn't thought about what he said that way until he mentioned it, because other than the Department of Licensing, which have some revenue activities, I think about all the other African American and other directors of color tend to be in the social services, healthcare, or corrections, but not associated with the money. So Paul made a very astute observation. So let me ask you a question. Why did you appoint me as the lottery director in the first place?
My view of affirmative action is really considering people that you might not otherwise consider, breaking out of the mold, giving people a chance, an opportunity, focusing on people who have, enthusiasm, drive, initiative, ethics, creativity, and a motto or guide of excellence.
Okay.
So that's how and I'm so pleased that so many of virtually all of the members of our cabinet led their agencies to incredible excellence and national acclaim. I mean, so many of the people that we appointed did not fit the traditional mold.
Right.
And so you were one of those, and took a chance.
Okay.
And you rewarded the state amply.
So are you saying, Governor, it wasn't because you wanted Marsha on the team and you had to take me? Can you say that and clear that up tonight for me?
Well, you and Marsha were a twosome and a twofer. And, I thought it was, Marsha had a reputation in administration and worked for the Commissioner of Public Lands. I had known Marsha a bit, but I also knew you.
Right.
We had a common political mentor named Ruth Lee,
right.
who was always encouraging, I think, both of us to think out of the box.
Right.
But, getting back to, when you said about the president of Western Washington University mistaking you or your associate, white person, for being the director.
Right.
When you attended the first National Lottery Association,
right.
one of the head of the Texas Lottery Commission,
right.
You were carrying a plate of food, going to your table. What quickly, without reading, tell us what happened.
No, I can do it. I'm at the lottery. I'm like peak of my career. I'm lottery director, cabinet, having a great time, getting lunch, walking to the table for lunch. And as I'm walking to my table to sit, I feel this white guy tug on my arm. And he looked at me and said, "I'll have a cup of black coffee," to me. And I looked at him, straightened eyes, as my mom would suggest, and said, "Man, I'm here just like you," and went and sat down. So whatever realm you're in and what you're doing, there's something that will pull your arm to let you know that you're not like everybody else here. So that's what happened.
You've obviously benefited from education. Your mom and dad emphasized education, said that you had to leave the state, go to Georgia for college.
Right.
They made sure that they paid for your education.
Right.
I mean, they sacrificed and scrimped and saved for your education. What have you and Marsha have created your own education foundation. Tell us what that's about and why.
Okay. Well, the Learning Seed Foundation, Governor, is what you're speaking of. In fact, I want to again thank you and Mona, because when we first started the foundation 20 years ago, the asset that we had, and the only asset we had at that time, was you and your name and your reputation. But we wanted to give back. We had been blessed, and we'd given to individual causes, but we wanted to do something more systemic. And thus far, we've been able to award over $450,000 to 109 students, and 89% of those students are students of color, which really, as I think about it, completes the circle of where my mom and dad started with me, and Marsha's parents started with her, with the importance of education.
You know, when I was governor, I always had that motto: education's the great
equalizer
in society, right? Regardless of your income level, your gender, your ethnic origin, with a quality education, we're all on a more level playing field. And education helps you achieve your dreams. And you've achieved a lot. What's next? What legacy do you hope to leave for other people?
That's a good question. I like to be able to leave a legacy of this is someone who cared about people other than himself, and looking out for the person who's been less fortunate, the little guy, the underdog, and to pay that forward. So that particular part of looking back and looking forward is what I like to be remembered for. And I think with our daughter, Marisa, and Dan, and our grandkids, Marcus and Eden, I think they will carry on that legacy.
From Gladstone Alley to Morehouse, and also to Merrill's Flower Shop with Mr. Wright, to Morehouse College, and then the Pacific Northwest. You've had an incredible journey.
I have.
From that very back of the bus when you were 5 years old. You've done quite a bit. And we're just so proud of you and thankful for this book, which, My View from the Back of the Bus by Merritt Long.
That's me.
In fact, your father, when he used to introduce himself, how would he introduce his name? Just tell us a little bit.
Well, my father would say, I'm Mac Long. And I didn't realize the effect of that on me until I started working in the correctional field. And I think I mentioned it to someone, Ray Messagey at Corrections. And he said, Mary, you do the same thing. So I repeat what my father had said. And I guess that's part of my homage to him.
Well, I think in many ways we are all the product of our parents,
mm-hmm.
and so many of their traits we somehow absorb,
right.
reflect. I noticed myself doing some things that my dad used to do.
Right.
Good habits and bad habits.
Right. Yeah, I understand.
But what a journey, Merritt, and it's been such a pleasure to have gotten to know you all through the years, even before I ran for governor, and then having you serve in my administration, and then also serving in Governor Gregoire's administration
yes.
after that. But really appreciate this book, My View from the Back of the Bus. It's so incredibly written. I enjoy rereading it. It's poetic, and I really love the touches about family and recollections of your mother and father and the lessons
mm-hmm.
and the examples that they provided you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Thank you. I'm really blessed.
Yeah. We want to thank our sponsors, Olympia Federal Savings, Comcast, Washington Realtors, Virgil Adams Real Estate, Safeway, Beth Morrison and Jeff Cooks, and the Merritt D. Long and Marcia Tadano Long for all of their contributions. Special thanks to South Puget Sound Community College, Dr. President Tim Stokes, for hosting this. And this is part of the South Puget Sound Community College Artist and Lecture Series of 2021. Thank you all very much.
And Governor, I want to thank you for being here tonight, for your support. You've always been there for me, and I very, very much appreciate it. And I just want you to know that, and I think you do. And I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our executive producer, Marcia Tadano Long, who, without her, that would be no My View from the Back of the Bus. So I wanted to do that. And then also to acknowledge the Hugh Weller family, the Tadano family, and the Long family for their support and encouragement of me and of us on our journey.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.